Welcome back, guys. I hope you're enjoying this little discussion of Freud. If you think it's been weird, just sit tight, put on your seatbelt, because it's about to get really weird. We are going to take a look at the psychoanalytic theory of personality, and that is Freud's stages of psychosexual development. So, yes, Freud is very controversial. A lot of gen psych professors don't teach him. I do, for two reasons. Number one, he is a cultural touchstone. You will absolutely read about him. He'll be referenced. I showed you that slide. Do we all speak Freud here? If you have ever talked about the unconscious or repression or denial or the Oedipus complex, you have spoken about Freud's ideas. So his ideas are unbelievably influential. Second reason is that I think there's a lot of truth to it. The defense mechanisms in particular have quite a bit of research support. Now we're going to get into some of the more controversial stuff, and that is his stages of psychosexual development. But I encourage you to keep an open mind, because in my experience, he's on to some things here. I'm not going to say he's got it all right. We'll see that in a minute. But is there some truth to this? I think there probably is. So according to Freud, humans pass through psychosexual stages of development. We've already discussed in the development chapter Erikson's stages of psychosocial development. These are not the same thing. Erikson is a neo-Freudian, meaning he built on Freud's ideas. So Freud has psychosexual stages, Erikson has psychosocial stages. So this is from birth to adulthood, and each of those stages has what he calls an erogenous zone. That's an area of the body that is the source of pleasure, as well as a conflict that has to be dealt with. Remember, with Erikson, we saw conflict, autonomy versus shame and doubt, trust versus mistrust. So the 5 stages are oral, anal, phallic, the latency period, and the genital stage. So let's take a look at each of those. So the oral stage is from birth to about 1.5 years. And what does a baby do with anything that they're handed? They put it in the mouth. And so Freud says that the erogenous zone, and erogenous does have a sexual component to it. You can think of it as a pleasurable zone, but there is definitely, for Freud, a sense that this is providing a little bit more than just pleasure, that there is an element of sexuality to it. The focus here is on sucking, chewing, gumming things. The conflict is weaning. That's the big conflict of the oral stage. At some point, you got to get off the breast or you got to get off the bottle. And so, and that's done with the mouth, right? And that's very hard for some babies. They will find it very difficult to stop sucking. And so he says that if babies get stuck here, if the conflict is too difficult, the giving up of the breast or the bottle, that they will develop what's called a fixation. They will become fixated on the oral stage, fixated on the erogenous zone of the mouth. And he says that's going to manifest in adulthood as behaviors that stimulate the mouth, like smoking or drinking or nail biting or even talking too much. So if you're a nail biter, if you're somebody who has to constantly be chewing gum. I was at a training one time with somebody who chewed gum so aggressively that I think it could be heard across the room. She went through an entire pack of gum, just chomping away at that stuff the whole time. We were there for 8 hours. She went through a whole pack of gum. By about 3 o'clock, she was done with the entire pack and was very frustrated that she didn't have any more. And I thought to myself, wow, I wonder if you had a hard time with weaning when you were a baby. So that's erogenous zone is the mouth, sucking, chewing, gumming, weaning is the conflict, and then things that stimulate the mouth in adulthood are the results of the fixation. The anal stage, what are 1.5 to 3-year-olds working on? They're working on potty training, right? And so he says that the erogenous zone is the anus. So that sounds weird to you, I'm sure, the idea that the anus is psychosexual pleasure. But of course it does, there's a certain amount of satisfaction, if not pleasure, associated with releasing the contents of the bowels in a bowel movement. The focus here is on elimination of bodily waste, and on controlling the bodily functions. The conflict is toilet training. This can be a very fraught experience for many parents and children. Sometimes children will be afraid of the toilet. They might be afraid that they're going to fall in, that they're going to be flushed down the toilet. They might then hold it in. Some children have been known to hold it in because they're afraid to use the potty. And so when that happens on occasion, they just will not poop. And then they can get a compacted bowel and have to have a procedure done to get it out. And that's very painful. The other side of this, though, might be that the parent shames the child. Maybe they are eliminating, but maybe they don't make it to the bathroom quite in time. If the parent's like, oh, gross, I can't believe you did that. Why did you pee on the carpet instead of in the toilet? That can end up with some fixation there. I had a friend over one time, and her child was potty training, and we were doing something, and he was playing in the house, and he went into my son's room and peed on the floor, on the carpet. And she was really mad, and she assured me that she was going to spank him when she got home. And I said, don't do that. He's in a strange environment. He's potty training. He probably didn't know what to do, where to go. And so he went away from people. Oftentimes you might find them in a corner, going potty in the corner behind furniture. He went out of the room and had to deal with his need to urinate. So I really encouraged her not to shame him for that, because what I didn't want was for him to become fixated. And there are two routes for this. We can become anal retentive, or we can become anal explosive. You've heard the term anal retentive. I'm sure you have described somebody as anal. When we say that somebody is anal, what do we mean by that? We mean that they're rule-bound, that they're stingy, that they have to have everything just so, that they're critical. This is thought to be a result of holding it in and being afraid to let the poop or the pee go. The other way it can go is an anal explosive person, somebody who is chaotic, destructive, diarrhea of the mouth, diarrhea of the emotions, just like pour it all out. These are people who didn't learn to control the body functions or had a hard time doing that as a child. So anal stage, 1.5 to 3 years, the anus, eliminating and controlling, toilet training, we can become anal retentive or anal explosive. Is this ringing true for you? I have certainly met people like this. I knew somebody who was anal explosive, and I thought, what in the world? Okay, the phallic stage. This is ages 3 to 6. You don't probably tend to think of 3 to 6-year-olds as sexual creatures, and most of us don't. I think Freud probably gets this one wrong. A child who is sexual at age 3 to 6, I would be worried about that child. I would be worried that maybe they have been exposed to sexual content too young. A child should not generally be acting out sexually at this stage. But do they experience pleasure from having the genitals touched? They can, by their own hand. Sometimes children will put their hand down there. And really this happens by accident. Maybe they had to pee, and what do kids do? They'll put their hand down there to kind of try to hold it in, so to speak, and then they'll discover that feels good. I read a book called Get Me Out of Here by Rachel Ryland. It's her story of borderline personality disorder. It's really interesting. Definitely recommend it to you. And she talks about being in her room. Her parents were very strict. Once you go to bed, you're there. Can't even leave to go to the bathroom. And she would frequently have to go to the bathroom, but she wasn't allowed out. And so she would put her hand down there to kind of hold it in and relieve some of the pain of needing to go to the bathroom. And then she discovered that it felt good. And then she began to masturbate as a young child. And then that became part of her BPD. So the focus here is sexual feelings and awareness of the self. Typically not sexual feelings toward other people, but sexual feelings based on the feelings in the genitals. The conflict here is what's called autoeroticism. The children are generally not acting out sexually toward other people, but they might try to put their hand down there. Or sometimes you might see a child who takes it upon, develops a habit of like humping pillows on the couch. That's autoeroticism. My best advice for you would be something, I would not freak out, but I would say calmly and without disdain or disgust, we don't do that. We don't put our hands down there. And we certainly don't do it in public. What you don't want is for it to become a habit, the humping or the putting the hand down there. So I really wouldn't even say, oh, it's fine if you're in private. Children, if they're stopped, if they're told this isn't appropriate, they'll typically stop, and then they won't become kind of obsessed with it until later in the genital stage, when they're in adolescence and they're experiencing sexual awakening. It'll usually pass away. Freud says that if a child becomes fixated and develops a habit of autoeroticism, that will manifest in some very particular ways in adulthood as promiscuity, being excessively flirtatious, being very vain, being sorry about the typo there, being overly dependent on people, masturbating excessively in adulthood. Masturbation is normal. Most adults will do that at different rates. Men tend to do it more than women. So a certain amount of masturbation is normal and fine, but we're talking about excessive masturbation may indicate that there was an autoerotic conflict in 3 to 6 years. Then there's the latency stage. This is 6 years to puberty, and this is the time during which children develop mentally, socially, and physically. This is very much Erickson's industry versus inferiority, where they're learning to be a friend and how to do art and how to do sports and how to do math and reading and science. The sexuality is really repressed. This is the stage when kids will say that the opposite sex has cooties, or there's kissing on TV and they're like, oh, gross, disgusting, and they hide under the covers. That's the latency stage, when they find everything about it disgusting. Now, when you have sex talks with children, it typically should be starting before puberty, right? And so you're going to be having conversations with children who find the whole thing appalling and disgusting. And they'll look at you like, why in the world would anybody ever do that? And they're mystified and they think it's disgusting and gross. And that's totally normal. And you just say to them, you know what? It's totally normal at your stage of life to think that's disgusting and gross. But at some point, you're going to be older and you won't think it's disgusting and gross. You'll think it's amazing and wonderful, and you're going to want to do that. So this is the point at which sexuality is repressed. So there is no erogenous zone here, and there is no conflict. The next stage is the genital stage. This is puberty and beyond. The erogenous zone here is, again, the genitals, as it was in ages 3 to 6. And the focus is on a reawakening sexuality and a focus on relationships and building relationships with other people. The conflict is sex and aggression. There's the id bubbles up with the desire for sex and being aggressive. And of course, you can't have that all the time. And so results of fixation can be inability to thrive in adult activities such as work and love. In modern parlance, we might say that incels have not resolved this stage well. We might say that people who are living in the basement and not forming relationships have not resolved the genital stage. All right. So the next thing that I want to share with you is a couple of add-on ideas to the stages of psychosexual development. So, are we on time? So I think that we will make that another video. So I'll see you then. And we'll discuss Oedipus and Electra complexes.